Hi, Umang.
Hi, Nishi.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think this is one of our conversations, except that we are recording it this time. And like our endless conversations on energy, climate change, state of the world, people. Yeah, so I am super excited. What about you?
Yeah, I'm fully excited. Never done this before, so looking forward to.
Tell us about yourself and what you're up to and how you got interested in climate change.
Okay. So I am a chemical engineer, and I graduated back in 2018 and joined GFL, Gujarat Fluorochemicals Limited. We manufacture fluoropolymers, and back in 2020, for one of my work-related assignments, I was asked to study about the lithium-ion batteries uh, because one of the fluoropolymer that we manufacture it it is used as a binder for the lithium-ion cells. So we were just beginning the production and development for that product, and so I was given the task of doing the market survey and just trying to understand what the space is like. So I did uh, some some research about why you need energy storage in the first place, and so that uh, related to the issue of climate change. Because uh, one of the most obvious solution for solving the issue of climate change is going away from fossil fuels and shifting to renewable energy. Uh, but the tricky bit is that renewable energy needs to be stored, right? Because uh, um, you can't avail it continuously. For example, what about the days when there's no sunshine, when there's no wind, right? So you need storage. So the obvious solution is electrify everything, and when you do that, you'll need a lot of storage capacities for the renewable energy. So uh, yeah, I tried to understand the issue of climate change. Not that I didn't know about it earlier, but it was the first sort of time when I consciously thought about it.
I did notice you.
Yeah. Otherwise, I think you and I both know we've had courses related to environment in our college, and we all of us know how we take those subjects. So yeah, I think that was like the very first conscious attempt of understanding the issue and uh, trying to think how can I actively contribute in solving that issue. And so from there, I thought I would want to understand more about the issue at scale. And so I joined this really cool online climate school called Terra.do. Uh, they are a global virtual climate school, and they run these cohorts uh, where you have participants from different backgrounds, different countries coming in uh, for a cohort where, and the course is about 12 weeks long, where you get a bird's eye view of everything that's happening in the climate space, starting from the problem itself, like the science behind it, why the climate is changing in the first place and how human activities have contributed to it. And from there, we talk about the solutions and also about the potential challenges in implementing those solutions, right? So, touching upon issues like climate injustice. And so, yeah, I did that course. And from there on, I thought I really want to make a transition career wise into this space. And so, I think after that, I've been looking actively for some internships and job positions where I can, uh, contribute in this space. So that's where I am.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think when you say that what led to this. So uh, let's start with like what led to what is actually needed and what is the current state of the climate change realm. So I know it's just more than those two words. So what all does it encapsulate and like what are we dealing with here? Then we can like discuss the solutions also that you possibly understand. But what are the problems? Like, can we break down the whole climate change problem into like different areas we can look at? Then we can sort of go into the solution, possible ones.
So I think fundamentally it's about the imbalance between the amount of carbon that's being emitted and the amount of carbon that comes back as a part of the carbon cycle. So you have sources of carbon, and sources would primarily be the activities that we do. Are the fossil fuels that we burn. Could also be the natural events like the forest fires and volcanic eruptions. All of these events add carbon into the atmosphere, and similarly there are sinks which take back the carbon uh, from the atmosphere. So you have oceans which absorb carbon, and then when you plant a tree, that also uh, trees absorb carbon dioxide from the air and they fix it under the ground. So you have these ways of bringing back the carbon. And what has happened over the last century or so is the the imbalance can be seen. The sources are emitting in a much larger number than what the sinks are able to bring back. So fundamentally, it's that imbalance which is causing the higher concentrations of carbon in the atmosphere, and that's just increasing the temperature of our planet. And as a consequence, you have these erratic behavior of climate, wherein you have floods and droughts and all these events which we have unheard of. So fundamentally, that's a problem, that it's this imbalance of what's going up and what's coming down, and as a result, a lot of it is getting accumulated in the atmosphere.
Yeah. So the imbalance, meaning the cycle that nature has, is kind of disrupted by human like activities. Yeah. What are some activities that contribute to this cycle imbalance?
So I think you have to look at the the sources of emissions. The fossil fuels that we utilize during our for all of our energy requirements. You need fossil fuels uh, for transportation, for the electricity that we use in our homes, for the energy used in the industries for manufacturing of different goods. Similarly, you also have other emissions from the industry itself. You have, say, the cement plants. Uh, they are one of the highest emitters of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. So you have all these heavy industries which consume a lot of energy, and they also uh, sort of are responsible for most of the emissions. And other than that, I think uh, so. It's also, I think, when we talk about carbon, we often forget about methane, which is another potent greenhouse gas, and some of the largest emissions of methane comes from the food that we waste. Once it is degraded, or that also leads to higher emissions of methane, and the way we do our farming also. So there are several sectors. I think we'll have to look at the numbers, but predominantly it's the energy requirements for transportation, manufacturing, and construction, which are like the top emitters of greenhouse gases.
When we look at these issues that like contribute to it, they are actually like activities that like keep the human life going, like keep the economy going in a way. So maybe it's not completely possible to avoid that, like discard all of those at this moment. But a gradual change would really be appreciated, right? Um,
It should have been gradual had it been realized a while ago. But I think if you look at the numbers, I mean, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but it really is now or never. There's very little room for uh, any procrastination or any denial that it's time for action. So the transition should have been gradual because if you look at the science, they've been told this probably like since the early 1900s that the burning of fossil fuel is going to be destructive for us. But all this while, us, political leaders and these industry giants, oil and gas giants, they kept denying that the impact of their activities and their business. So it really has gotten to a point where uh, we, we don't even know if we decide to say implement all of the solutions starting tomorrow. Let's say even if we decide to like go 100% renewable from tomorrow, we don't know if that's going to be enough, right? So uh, I think it's a little too late, but so I think one of the ways of looking at that would be the average increase in the temperature, right? That's projected. So all of our models currently, which so there are these climate models, which predict that if the average temperature of the Earth goes by, say, a 1 degree, or say 1.5 or 2, and all the way up to, there's a possibility of going up to 4 degrees Celsius, right? This is in comparison to the pre-industrial uh, era, right? So all of these scenarios will have different outcomes. And as of now, what we know is that if we are able to keep the average increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius, then that's like the safe limit. And based on that, every country has been asked to reduce its emissions significantly. This was, I think, the crux of Paris Climate Agreement that happened in 2015, where all the countries actually came together and they acknowledged that climate change is real and all of us need to do something about it. So that's the target that we have under the Paris Agreement, where that the average increase in temperature has to be limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
yeah, can you tell a little bit more about the Paris Agreement? Uh, what the countries decided?
So the increase in temperature is linked to the amount of greenhouse gases that go up. The more number of greenhouse gases you'll have, the faster the atmosphere will warm up and it will heat up the planet faster. So it has been linked to the amount of emissions that we add into the atmosphere. And again, this is other than the carbon that's already there, the excess carbon that's there in the atmosphere, which is causing the heating, right? So it's not just about reducing our emissions, but it's also about trying to remove the excess carbon that's already there in the atmosphere. So we need to cut down on the emissions. That's one thing, so that we don't add additional carbon there. And also we need to remove some of the excess carbon that's already there. So trying to find ways to, uh, you know, absorb some of the carbon. And there are so many technologies for uh, carbon fixation, and uh, you have these. I think recently there was uh, a study about trying to set up these giant carbon absorption towers, which would directly capture carbon from the air. And so both these solutions need to sort of go parallelly so that we get to a state where the average increase in temperature is less than 1.5 degrees Celsius. When I say this, it's compared to the pre-industrial era. So whatever the average surface temperature was there of Earth, compared to that, a 1.5 degree rise is acceptable, or that's like the safe limit.
Okay. What was it back then? Do you have any idea?
I think it was close to 23 degrees Celsius, but I will have to check.
23
They usually relate it to the
temperature of atmosphere.
the Earth's surface. We'll have to check that again. I think, but the way they relate it to is the amount of carbon that's there in the atmosphere. So the concentration of carbon is usually the key tracker for us every year.
Okay.
Yeah. So then I think that was like the first formal event where majority of the countries actually acknowledged the issue of climate change, and they took targets to reduce their emissions by 2030, 2050. And I think so. If you look at India right now, we are quite well on track to meet our targets that we're taking, but that's not the case with other countries as well right now. And so I think there is going to be another climate meet in November this year. So we'll have.
So I think, so yes, the countries decide the targets. And when you said, like, in all the climate communications, I sense a lot of urgency. So how intensely are we talking about this? And I think, like, and there are deadlines and targets. So how are these set, and are they viable? Like, can a country or economy take steps to do that, or on the individual level also? But we can start from the country and then go to the individual level, what we can do. But I was actually wondering how all of it will be possible, because there's already so much out there, like, so, like our dependency on um, the basic, like, fossil fuels. Right now, our homes are run by the power plant that burns fossil fuels. So, just wondering how all of that would pan out um, on a in the on an implementation level, and like, how urgent are we talking about? Like, for 100%, because I think you mentioned that even if we do 100% tomorrow, and then my question is, but how is it even, like, possible? Very, like, in the very near future.
So the urgency is definitely there. There's no second thoughts about that, and the countries do realize that because see, I think it's gotten to a point where it's about survival. It's not even like we're gonna do this to save the planet. It's about saving ourselves. That's what it's really about. So when you talk about the way they take those targets, one of the thing that's really important to understand is the idea of climate justice. So historically, if you look at the numbers, uh, the developed nations that we see right now, you have the West primarily, the US, and then you have Europe, European nations who have significantly uh, contributed to the emissions, right? All these years and these emissions were kind of, they got their economies to a point where they are right now. And the usage of fossil fuels has definitely attributed to their economy, right? Whereas if you look at some of the developing countries, you have India and you have other countries in the Asia Pacific, which are at the stage where their energy requirements are going up significantly as their economies grow. So it would be unfair to ask these countries to cut down their emissions, right? Because historically they have not even had a significant share to the creation of problem in the first place. So that's where the idea of climate justice comes in. Who does how much, in solving the issue. So, uh, and one of the thing that addresses this issue is the funds that the countries of the West are required to put in developing nations to support their economies, and so that's how the climate justice picture comes in. While deciding the targets also, each country gets to say that this is our share of emission and this is how much we should be uh, able to cut down upon, so that's what happens in all of these climate meets as well, where these points about climate justice are discussed at a much more detailed manner, uh, trying to bring in the numbers. And yeah, so that's about the targets.
To kind of meet those targets, or to progress with the betterment of the issue further, there are something called, like, I've heard, carbon offsets or carbon credits that can be bought or sold, to balance out. If they are producing more, they can buy some credits. Is that how it works? And do countries and companies do that? Can we go a little bit into that?
This is a personal opinion. Uh, Offsets are not really a way to solve the climate change. So when a country, a Western developed country, decides to uh, continue with its emission, but at the same time uh, offset their emissions by planting trees in the developing countries, I don't think that's helping the cause, because that's just deviating from the issue. So I don't know how effective offsets actually are, and same goes for carbon credits as well. They're good for the economy, like companies in India can greatly benefit by uh, by selling off those carbon credits to the countries, to the companies of the West. So that's good for the economy, but to be really able to solve the issue, I don't know how effective they are. In my opinion, I don't think they are really that significant.
So first of all, I did not know the difference between carbon offsets and credits. So thanks for explaining that. I thought they were the same, but yeah, that makes sense now. So carbon offsets are your kind of equivalent. You're planting the trees, equivalent how much, like the rough equivalent of how much you're producing, right?
So it's not necessarily about planting the trees per se. For example, so say I decide to take a flight from point A to point B, and there's a certain emission associated with that, certain kg of carbon equivalent, right? So the idea of offsets is that the same amount of uh, carbon I'll contribute in the activity that will absorb uh, the same equivalent of carbon. For example, it's a random number, say 100 kg of CO2 equivalent is my emission for traveling. So I could maybe contribute to by paying or by donating to an organization that's working in the field of uh, one of the things that you mentioned was planting trees, but that's just one aspect of it. There are several other ways of bringing back or absorbing the carbon. Yeah.
So what I was saying is that if you're planting in some other developing country, but you're actually um, doing like harm to your own country, like, or land. Maybe, yeah. Uh, but if you actually need it, then to sort of balance in on the whole of the earth, it, this is the solution they are going for right now. Okay, okay, that makes sense. So then I think even companies do that. Like I see a lot of corporate social responsibility activities, CSR, going on around environment protection. And so how do you look at that? Have you seen some companies doing that?
I think it's a joke when they do that, given how much they are actually contributing to the problem. That's just greenwashing all of the bad stuff that they've done or they're currently doing. Uh, so like I said, changes have to be made uh, at a much more deeper level. It's not just about simply planting trees. That's not the only solution. A lot of times even I think as individuals, when we think about contributing to the climate space, we just want to plant a few more trees here and there. But honestly, if you look at the numbers, it's just not going to be enough. You need to find ways to cut your emissions sharply and as quickly as possible, right? And simultaneously, you need to come up with ways of carbon capture. So, yeah, to be honest, I don't think, I mean, it looks good when they do it, but at the same time, that in itself is not sufficient. There's much more that they can do. They're doing it because I think that's the easiest possible solution for them.
Or because it looks good on paper?
Yeah, definitely. Exactly. So if I were to tell you, instead of say electrifying your entire the fleet uh, or your supply chain, that you have, the way you get your raw materials, the way you ship your products as a company, can you invest in electrifying your buses? Can you do that? Or would you like to plant some more trees, right? So then, uh, obviously, the easiest or the most sort of cheaper solution is planting more trees, right?
I think the most like handy solution. But trees take time to grow, right? It's a very long term process.
Exactly. And it's not just that, you also need to find ways of nurturing those trees for the years that they take time to grow.
So, how about we talk about like on the individual level? I think what you and I like can contribute um, to making this better than yesterday, let's say, not by a very large. So, what are the little steps that we can take that, on the whole, as humanity, it'll make an impact? I think you had an app idea also to reward people who do take steps to do that. So, can you tell us a little about that?
So I think it comes down to the choices, uh, the everyday choices that we make, be it about the kind of materials that we use and the way we move around, the work that we're doing actually. Career is a big thing, which through which you can actually contribute in the space. For example, and we need all kinds of people working in the space because it's not just about the environmental engineers and the scientists who can solve this issue. You need policymakers who are climate conscious. You need uh, programmers. You need software developers who can develop better algorithms for us to monitor our emissions and to develop climate models which are much more accurate. you know. Similarly, you need manufacturing companies to understand the impact of their products and possibly get into circularity by uh, reusing some of their products, or maybe finding ways to recycle and, you know, sort of proper end treatment of your product. So the companies have a role to play, and as individuals also, like I said, the 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 choices that we make. How do you move around? Can you invest in solar for your electricity needs at your homes? Can you uh, can take yeah take public transport? Can you choose political leaders who would actually uh, help or take decisions which would contribute in this space? So that's another big power that we have that we don't realize, the type of leaders that we're going to choose. And what else? I think also just talking about climate and creating that sense of awareness around us, and uh, just uh, helping in uh, creating more climate leaders by uh, talking about the issue and brainstorming about what can be the possible solutions. So there are all these little things that you and I can do in our own ways.
I think speaking of like this is like this designing the environments around us. I think you've done like fair amount of research and understanding on buildings that are green, not green in color, but that are essentially green at their core, in that they um, are have net zero production on their. So how do these buildings get made, and what is this concept of net zero buildings?
After uh, the course that I finished, I got an opportunity to intern with a startup called Smarter Dharma. They are based out of Bangalore, and currently they are working with builders uh, uh, and helping them design green buildings. So when we talk about uh, why green buildings in the first place, I think the like I said, construction or the real estate segment is the one that's amongst the top contributor to the emissions right now. But it's also the space where if you put X amount of investment, it's going to give you maximum improvement in terms of like the solution. So it has the most uh, potential to mitigate carbon with with the same amount of investment if you compare it to other solutions. So uh, that's why they've chosen this segment. Uh, and the way they are doing it is they're currently developing a platform which would enable decision makers, primarily the builders themselves, because they put in their money, so they have a huge say in how the building is going to be made. And so they are enabling these decision makers to take more climate conscious decisions. And they're doing this by creating a platform which will uh, give you a real time uh, data about what is going to be the footprint of your project. What are some of the potential solutions, that you can implement within your project? And for each of those intervention, what is going to be the impact, both resource wise as well as economically as well? How much is it going to cost you to implement that solution? So once you have that platform readily available to you, as a decision maker, you can decide and come up with an optimum solution for your project, right? So currently they are targeting yeah, the design stage itself. So uh, and then currently they're targeting four things. They're targeting the energy. So how is the entire energy requirement of the building going to be met? Uh, then they talk about water. How is how is the usage of water going to be, and how can you save water at what points you can actually save water as a resource? How do you deal with the wastewater? Can you reuse some of it after treatment? Uh, the third part is about the waste. How is the waste of the community or the society that's going to live in that building going to be handled, right? So because there's the scope of getting energy from that waste as well. Like if you're able to implement say a biogas uh, or a small recycling unit, you are able to get some uh, energy out of it as well. So waste is another one, and the last one is the type of materials that are going to be used in that building. Starting from the type of cement, the tiles that are going to be used, the wood, and all of that, the paint. So all of that material that's going to be used for that construction.
And all of this happens through, you can simulate this through software. Like you can see it. What do you input and like what output do you get?
The input would be these some of the design parameters that you have. It could be so uh, the area that you have, the land area that you have, number of towers that you're going to have, number of floors, number of units that are going to be there in the building, and it will roughly calculate the number of residents through all of this data, and then it will try to calculate their energy and water requirements. So all of the preliminary data that you have at the beginning of a project, you put in that. The more accurate your data points are, the better the algorithm results will be. And yeah, and so it will give you uh, these uh, interventions that can be implemented in your project, and you can tweak around in real time, and it will give you the the financial impact of it, and also the resource impact of all of these interventions.
So on the whole, is it more viable or does it cost more to be energy efficient? Like have a net zero building? Like in the long term, I'm sure like it would um, make sense, but does it actually? Are there any observations around that? Or
Look, any day it makes both economic sense as well as it's logical to live uh, in a more sustainable manner, right? It's people want to live that way, uh, but currently the awareness is something that's lacking. I think because you see the way a builder will think is why should I put in the extra money for the sustainable solution when it's the owners, the people who will live there, they're going to benefit from it. And besides, we as users are little reluctant to pay that extra money for that additional service that we're getting. So the demand side is something that's still the builders are struggling with. If you have more demand for such projects, then naturally the builder will be confident and build more such buildings. It's either that or you have some changes happening at policy level. So I think it has to be a mix of both. As users, we need to be more conscious about the type of houses we want to live in, and at the same time, from the government side, we need to have these policy-related changes. For example, in Baroda, you have all the new projects that are being made. They have a mandate that they'll have a rainwater harvesting system. So that's one good thing. Then you have a lot of rooftop solar is very common nowadays. So that's another thing. these are the more common ones, but like to be really efficient or a green building, there's a lot more that can be done.
And the way it's designed, it tends to net zero. So, like, what is net zero? Can you explain that concept also? It's like we talked about buildings, and I think it's about producing sustainably, like the energy that you produce and consumes should cancel out. Is it that?
Yeah, so essentially it's about meeting uh, the energy requirement through renewable is what I understand. So, for example, any building that will have certain energy requirements of its own, and at the same time, when it is being made, it will have its own carbon footprint, right? Because of the material that is being used to design that building. When you try to balance that with the amount of uh, the energy that it's either the energy that you are able to produce through renewable, or also the say you have certain mechanisms of uh, uh, some carbon capture, or you have plants around the building so that it is able to also remove some of the carbon. So um, I think I'll have to dig a little more about uh, the nitty-gritties of a net zero building, but essentially it's about the balance between those two.
Yeah, balancing the requirement and the like production of it.
Yeah.
Hopefully, like more people will join, like be open to having such a lifestyle, and that would encourage the businesses to build those areas, residential areas, and hopefully commercial areas. I think it's like a um, effect. What is it? Butterfly effect? I forgot. Yeah, but some effect that causes everyone to participate. And I think you're right about the awareness. How that uh, like people from different backgrounds, different um, areas and countries, the adoption depends on how aware they are about how they can live, and once their basics are sorted, they can think about like living sustainably also.
So I think that's also where climate justice comes in, right? Where you have these developing countries where the basic necessities are not being met yet for a uh, large segment of their population. So asking them to uh, make better choices would be unfair. And but the good part is the fact that we are at a stage where we're building new infrastructure for all of our population. If we are able to build better at the design stage itself, you know, then we don't need to look at it after 50 years. If we are able to do this right now, the, and this is not just about infrastructure, but
Yeah, so it's sustainable by design,
exactly.
right?
Unlike the countries of the West where they've had a flawed design, but now they need to go back and change their ways of doing things, we can do it at the inception or the design stage itself.
Yeah, I think uh, in some cases you need uh, it to happen by design, like prevent before it happens, and if we've gone a little bit far, then we'll have to readjust and make repairs if that is what is being looked for. Yeah. Do you have anything to add, like in the whole climate change discussion?
No, I think it would be a repetition of what I've just said, but two things really. One, the issue is very much real. There's no scope of denial. So to people who are still thinking, uh, how does that all affect me? Uh, it does. It will affect no matter how wealthy or poor you are. It will affect you in different proportions, but it will affect us because it climate. relates to the kind of food you're going to eat. Uh, Something as simple as your safety. Say if you have more and more storms and floods coming in the years to come, how are you going to ensure that your houses are going to protect you from these calamities? So uh, really, it's to think that it's not going to be something that I'll be uh, troubled with is foolish. So it's very much there. And the second thing would be uh, this idea of saying I'm too insignificant to contribute is something that can be changed. I think uh, individually also there are so many things we could do which will help in solving this issue. So yeah, I think it's time that we think about these things.
Yeah, it is inevitable. Um, I would like to ask you about the social causes that you have contributed so far, the ones that you like to share with us. Any stories, how you're helping like people get on with their lives.
So broadly, two areas that I've been able to contribute in. One of them is education. So just uh, in whatever free time or in whatever ways I can, I try to uh, visit these low-income community schools. And since I come from the science background, I enjoy uh, teaching science to them. And so uh, there was this project that I did uh, where I performed these experiments, science experiments that are part of the curriculum. And because these schools do not have the infrastructure or the resources to actually build a science lab, uh, what we did was we went to the schools and performed these experiments in front of the kids so that they could get a feel of things instead of just learning them uh, in the textbooks. The second one is related to uh, creating awareness around menstruation and sustainable menstruation in particular. So one of the project was about trying to teach women the benefits of using cloth pads or sustainable products during menstruation and during uh, and trying to link that with employment. So if they are able to make cloth pads, if they're able to stitch cloth pads on their own, they could maybe make more of them and probably sell it in their communities. So that could be like a source of income for them. And at the same time, cloth pads are definitely much more environment friendly. So it'll also help the climate in that way. So more or less, it's been about these two domains: education and awareness around menstrual hygiene.
That's so good. Thanks so much for contributing your bit, and you're such an inspiration. Yeah, I do have one more question about your experience after college and working in the industry to people who like how has your outlook changed from college to right now, let's say when you're working and thinking about these things, how do you feel?
So there's definitely a huge gap in what you learn in college and what actually helps you in the world out there in your uh, career. So some of the simple lessons that I've learned are related to how you present yourself, in a work environment. So something as simple as the way you dress, the way you behave, and the way you talk in front of people, that speaks volumes about you, regardless of the field that you are in. So uh, that was like a big takeaway where I started thinking about these not so significant uh, uh, things, I would say, because in college it's never about, it's always about the knowledge bit, the marks, who scores the most, who has the most knowledge. But uh, beyond college, I think there's so much you need to work upon personally, in terms of your skills of dealing with people and presenting yourself. So that's one bit that I've learned. The second is about, even though you could be a, a specialist in one of the field, in your own field, having an idea about what's happening in the world uh, can really widen your horizon. So like, uh, for me, I'm into sales right now. So if I if I start keeping myself updated about the geopolitical events that are happening, they'll actively benefit me in my work, because the world is so much more connected now. And so having an open mind to a lot of things, instead of just trying to narrow down your vision, would really help. And the third thing is about trying to find a balance. There's always going to be too much work and little fun, but if you find a way to take take some time off every now and then, focus on your health, and uh, spend time with your family. So I think that's one bit which is really uh, important.
Thank you, Monk, for spending the time on the show. I'd love to have you again.
Thank you for having me.